We all think we know the story. A world so wicked that God hits the reset button. A great flood washes the slate clean, saving only one righteous man, his family, and a boatload of animals. Genesis tells us the flood was the final solution. But what if it wasn't? What if the most terrifying corruption from the world before survived? Centuries after the ark landed, Noah's descendants stood on the edge of the promised land. But when their spies came back, they brought a report of pure terror. They spoke of giants, a monstrous race they called the Nephilim, the very beings the flood was supposed to have wiped from existence. And here's where the Bible seems to throw us off. In Genesis 6, the Nephilim are on the earth. Then the flood. Then, in Numbers 13, the spies say, "We saw the Nephilim there." How? The answer isn't a single line in a forgotten scroll. It's a puzzle scattered across Scripture, hidden in genealogies, debated phrases, and the commands for a holy war. Today, we're tracing the forbidden family trees and hidden scriptures to uncover the shocking theories behind the return of the Nephilim. To understand how they came back, we have to understand what they were. Genesis chapter 6 sets a strange and unsettling stage. It tells us, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. From this union, a new race was born. Verse 4 says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. They were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. For centuries, people have debated who these sons of God were. One ancient and popular interpretation, backed up by texts like the Book of Enoch, argues they were fallen angels who came down and had children with human women. In this view, the Nephilim were their monstrous hybrid offspring. Now, that's not the only view. Other scholars suggest the sons of God were from the righteous line of Seth, who intermarried with the worldly line of Cain. A mixing of bloodlines, but a purely human one. Still others think they were just powerful human kings who claimed to be gods. Whatever their origin, their world became saturated with evil. Genesis 6:5 says the wickedness of man was so great that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. While the Bible blames this human wickedness for the flood, ancient traditions, like the Book of Enoch, put the Nephilim at the very center of it all, seeing the flood as a direct act to destroy their unnatural lineage. This is where Noah comes in. Genesis 6:9 calls him blameless in his generation. For most of history, this has been taken to mean he was a morally good guy who stood apart from the evil of his day. But a more speculative reading has surfaced in some circles. In the context of a world supposedly tainted by hybrid genetics, some propose blameless referred not just to his character, but to his bloodline. It suggests Noah's family tree was pure, uncorrupted by any angelic human mingling. If that genetic view is right, the flood becomes a surgical strike, a genetic cleansing. It was meant to be a total extermination of the Nephilim bloodline. And yet, centuries later, there they are, towering over the Israelite spies. This is the central problem, a scriptural cliffhanger that has fueled debate for millennia. Before we get into the wild theories, let's look again at that key verse. Genesis 6:4. It has a little phrase that some believe cracks the whole case. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. At first glance, that seems to solve it, right? The Bible says they were there before, and also afterward. Case closed. But it's not nearly that simple. The meaning of that one little phrase is one of the most debated parts of this whole story. On one hand, you could argue this is a clear statement that the Nephilim phenomenon wasn't a one-off. It happened before the flood, and the text is giving us a heads up to expect it again. It's foreshadowing, prepping us for the giant's return in the book of Numbers. But on the other hand, many scholars point out the original Hebrew is a bit ambiguous. The phrase could be a later editor's note, like a scribe adding a little comment to connect the ancient Genesis story to the giant clans the Israelites would later encounter in Canaan. It would be like a footnote saying, by the way, these are the same kind of giants we'll run into later. So it might not be a prophecy, but just a way to link two parts of the story. It's a tantalizing clue, but not a smoking gun. This brings us to our first major theory, and it's probably the most controversial. The idea is that the Nephilim bloodline did survive the flood, not by treading water, but by hiding in the one place God chose to save, the ark itself. The theory goes like this. The Nephilim DNA was carried aboard by one of the 4 women on the ark. Noah's wife, or one of his sons' wives. The logic is that the sons of God were the male figures who sinned, and while Noah's male line was pure, the Bible tells us nothing about the wives' genealogies. It's an argument from silence. Proponents suggest that a woman descended from the Nephilim line could have married one of Noah's sons. Carrying that genetic code with her, the code could have then stayed dormant, like a recessive gene, for a generation or 2. This is where the story of Noah's son, Ham, gets interesting for this theory. After the flood in Genesis 9, Ham does something to disrespect his father. The result is a curse, but Noah doesn't curse Ham directly. He curses Ham's son, Canaan. Proponents of this theory ask, why curse the grandson? They speculate that maybe in the grandson, that dormant Nephilim gene popped back up, that Noah saw something, a physical or spiritual trait he recognized from the world before, and cursed the lineage where the corruption had resurfaced. Now, we have to be clear, this connection is pure speculation. The Bible itself says the curse was because Ham dishonored his father. It doesn't mention giants Nephilim or tainted bloodlines in Genesis 9. The idea of a genetic reason is a modern attempt to solve the Nephilim puzzle. This theory is appealing because it doesn't need any new supernatural events after the flood. But it has major weaknesses. First, it's built entirely on guesswork, with no direct biblical support. The Bible never talks about Nephilim genes or recessive traits. Second, it creates a huge theological problem. If the whole point of the flood was to cleanse the earth of this specific corruption, then letting it onto the ark seems to make the whole disaster a failure from the start. We're getting into some pretty complex and debated territory here. The Bible is full of these mysteries that challenge us to keep digging. If you love exploring ancient puzzles like this, and you want to be part of a community that isn't afraid to ask tough questions, then hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We've got a lot more to uncover. Now back to the video. If the special genes for being a giant didn't sneak onto the ark, where else could the post-flood giants have come from? This brings us to theory number 2. It happened again. This is known as the second incursion theory, and it argues that the sin of the sons of God back in Genesis 6 wasn't a one-time thing. It suggests that after the flood, a completely new group of fallen angels, or watchers, as the book of Enoch calls them, came down to earth and repeated the exact same mistake, creating a brand new generation of giants. The main biblical hook for this idea, as we've already touched on, is that little phrase in Genesis 6:4, and also afterward. Supporters of the second incursion theory take this very literally. They see it as a direct statement that this event happened more than once, both before and after the flood. This view also finds supporting patterns in texts outside the Bible. For example, the first book of Enoch gives a very detailed account of the first fall of the Watchers and all the chaos their giant children caused. Now, while Enoch doesn't explicitly describe a second fall, some interpreters point to other ancient texts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of these, the Damascus document, mentions the fall of the heavenly Watchers and then immediately warns about other demonic snares. For some, this hints that angelic interference wasn't a single event, but a recurring problem for humanity. But this theory runs into some pretty big biblical roadblocks. When the New Testament talks about the sin of the angels, in places like 2 Peter or in Jude, it always talks about it in the past tense as a single ancient event. It describes those specific angels as being thrown into chains of darkness, where they are kept for the judgment of the great day. That sounds like a very final punishment, not an ongoing issue where new groups of angels are free to come down and do the same thing all over again. The bottom line is, the canonical Bible just doesn't contain a clear story of a second post-flood angelic fall. So, while the second incursion theory offers a simple explanation for the return of the giants, it's mostly an argument from inference. It has to rely heavily on traditions and texts that are outside the standard biblical canon to make its case. The first two theories assume that the giants in Canaan were the same kind of being as the pre-flood Nephilim. But our third theory asks a different question. What if Nephilim wasn't a biological label, but a term of propaganda? This theory suggests the spies' report in Numbers 13 was a terrified exaggeration. Imagine the scene. 12 guys are sent to scout a land God promised them. 10 of them come back completely broken. They saw huge cities and warriors, so big they felt like insects. Numbers 13:33 captures it perfectly. And there we saw the Nephilim, and we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. You can feel their fear. In that state, they reached for the scariest word they knew, Nephilim. It was a name from the legends of the world before, a name tied to monstrous power and divine judgment. According to this theory, the spies weren't making a literal genealogical ID. They were using a powerful historical label to say, these guys are monsters. They are as scary as the legends say. We can't beat them. It's like calling a fearsome enemy today a super soldier. Not a literal claim, but an expression of how powerful they seem. The strength of this theory is that it solves the whole puzzle. The flood did its job. The giants in Canaan are just that. Giants, unusually large and fierce humans, but not supernatural hybrids. The main weakness, though, is that the text presents the claim pretty directly. It doesn't say they were like the Nephilim. It says, we saw the Nephilim there, and then adds a specific note. The descendants of Enoch come from the Nephilim. That little parenthetical comment suggests a more direct link than just fearful name-calling. While the spies were definitely scared and trying to discourage everyone, dismissing their words as just a metaphor might be letting them off too easy. No matter which theory you prefer, one thing is clear. The land of Canaan was filled with clans famous for their incredible size. The Bible doesn't just mention them once, it gives them names, territories, and histories. The books of Deuteronomy and Joshua read like a field guide to these giant clans. The most common term is the Rephaim. The name pops up multiple times to describe the ancient, powerful people of the land. Deuteronomy 2 even says other nations had their own names for them. The Moabites called them the Emim, described as a people great and many, and tall as the Anakim. The Ammonites called them the Zamzummim, also a great and many and tall people. Rephaim seems to be a general category for these giant groups, though the word can also, confusingly, refer to the spirits of the dead in other contexts. The most famous of these clans were the Anakim. They were the ones who sent the spies into a panic. Deuteronomy 9 talks about their fearsome reputation, a people great and tall. The sons of the Anakim, whom you know, and of whom you have heard it said, who can stand before the sons of Anak? Their ancestor was named Anak, and their main city was Hebron, deep in the hills of Judah. Genesis 10, the Table of Nations, traces all of humanity from Noah's sons. While it doesn't mention giants, later texts place these giant clans in the territory of Ham's descendants, particularly his grandson Canaan. So many have drawn a line connecting them, suggesting that whatever caused the giants to reappear, it flowed through this specific family line. That's an inference, not a direct statement, but it's a key clue in the mystery. The most vivid description we get is of Og, the king of Bashan. Deuteronomy 3 calls him the last of the remnant of the Rephaim. His power was legendary, symbolized by his enormous iron bed, which measured 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. That's roughly 13.5 feet long by 6 feet wide. This wasn't just a tall guy, this was a figure of epic proportions. A king who ruled a fortified land and stood as the last remnant of a terrifying ancient race. This brings us to one of the toughest parts of the Old Testament, the conquest of Canaan. The Bible says God commanded total destruction, harem warfare, against certain people in the land, including these giant clans. To us, this sounds like a brutal and unjust genocide. But what if we've been missing the context? One particular theological framework, developed by scholars like the late Dr. Michael Heiser, reframes this whole conflict. This view argues the conquest wasn't an ethnic war, but a supernatural one. It was round 2 of the war that started in Genesis 3, between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. In this interpretation, the Nephilim bloodline, whether from a dormant gene or a second incursion, was a deliberate corruption of the human race. The land of Canaan wasn't just occupied by people with a different religion, it was the hotspot for this supernatural infection. According to this view, the giant clans made the land a spiritual and genetic swamp that had to be drained to protect humanity and, crucially, to preserve the pure lineage through which the Messiah would one day be born. It's vital to understand that this is one particular theological viewpoint. Most mainstream scholars interpret the commands for total destruction differently, as a judgment against the Canaanites' depraved moral practices, like child sacrifice, or in historical and political terms. The idea of a targeted genetic cleansing is a specific interpretation, not a universally held fact. But if you adopt this supernatural worldview, the commands suddenly make a different kind of sense. In this theological narrative, Joshua was finishing the job the flood had started. The Bible never says this outright, but the pattern is hard to miss. The flood was a global response to a corruption. The conquest was a local response to its comeback. The book of Joshua meticulously records this mission. Joshua 11:21-22 says, "And Joshua came at that time and cut off the Anakim from the hill country. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel." But then it adds a critical detail. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. The cleanup was almost total, but not quite. A remnant survived, pushed back to the coast, into the cities of the Philistines. And it's from there that the final, most famous giant would emerge. For generations, the story of the giants goes quiet. Israel settles the land, but the remnant in the Philistine cities didn't just disappear. They waited. Then, in the valley of Elah, the problem comes roaring back. 1 Samuel 17 describes him, a champion from Gath, a man over 9 feet tall, covered in bronze armor. His name was Goliath. Gath, remember, was one of the 3 cities where the Anakim remnant survived. The Bible doesn't explicitly call Goliath an Anakite, but the connection is hard to miss. Goliath was a living echo of the terror that had paralyzed the spies centuries earlier. But he wasn't alone. 2 Samuel chapter 21 reads like the final act in the giant war. It lists 4 other giant Philistine warriors described as relatives of Goliath. Men like Ishbi-benob, whose spear was too heavy for a normal soldier to lift, a giant named Seph, another warrior with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. The text says these men were born to the giant in Gath. The original Hebrew here is fascinating. Some scholars translate this as descendants of Rapha in Gath. Rapha is the singular form of Rephaim. While the connection is debated, many interpreters see this as a direct statement. These Philistine giants were the last known descendants of the ancient Rephaim clan, the lineage of Og and the other giants of old, and one by one, they all fall. David famously takes down Goliath with a sling and a stone. The others are defeated by David's elite warriors, his mighty men. Ishbi-benob is struck down by Abishai. Seph is killed by Sibbekai. Goliath's brother is killed by Elhanan. The 20-fingered giant is slain by David's nephew, Jonathan. With the deaths of these last champions, the biblical story of giant clans as a distinct threat inside the Promised Land finally comes to an end. The lineage that terrified spies, prompted a holy war, and challenged a king is, in the biblical record, finally silenced. So, after all that, how did the Nephilim bloodline survive the flood? The Bible doesn't give us one clean answer. It gives us a profound mystery and a trail of tantalizing clues. We're left with these competing theories. Was it a dormant gene, carried silently on the ark, only to re-emerge in the line of Ham? It's a compelling idea, but it's highly speculative and seems to undermine the very point of the flood. Was it a second incursion? A repeat of the angelic sin that started the whole mess? This theory has support from ancient traditions, but lacks a clear story in the Bible itself. Or was it all a matter of language and fear? Did Nephilim become a terrifying label for any big, scary enemy used by the spies to voice their horror? This neatly solves the biblical contradiction, but maybe downplays the direct language the spies used. What we do know is that the Bible confirms giants existed before the flood, and it confirms terrifying giant clans existed after. The story follows Israel's clash with these giants, the command to purge them from the land, and the final heroic battles fought by David and his men. The story of the Nephilim is a thread of high strangeness woven through the Bible, a reminder that the world of the Scriptures was seen, as a place of deep spiritual conflict, where the battle for humanity was fought not just in hearts, but in the very bloodlines of nations. Which theory do you find most compelling? Was it a hidden gene, a second angelic fall, or the fearful words of terrified men? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this video challenged you or gave you new insight, please consider giving it a like. It really helps more people see it. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. We're digging deep into topics that matter, and I'd love for you to be part of this community of truth seekers and believers. Until next time, stay rooted in the Word, stay alert, and remember, truth isn't always popular, but it always sets you free.